What's up guys, this is Casey Underhill and welcome to the beginner Blender tutorial. A lot of people are asking for beginner tutorials, so I want to make this as simple and as easy as possible. If you're not a beginner, then you might want to skip this one. So, welcome to Blender. I'm using version 2.74. Most of the time I will say, if you downloaded Blender a long time ago and got a very old version, it's very good to update your version of Blender. So go to Blender, I think it's blender.org, I can't remember. It's been a while since I've been there, but make sure that you get the most updated version. However, most of the features in Blender do not change very drastically. I'm assuming that you guys have all downloaded Blender. You're not just watching this to get started. So I'm not going to show you how to download Blender. Just Google it, find it, whatever. Okay, so the very first thing when you open up Blender, you're going to look at it and probably be very confused and not know what in the world you're doing, what in the world you're looking at. So let's go through this step by step. The first thing that you want to look at is this very top bar. You're going to use this top bar a lot. And the very first thing that I want you to do is right here in this little box. Mine says Cycles Render. Yours will probably say Blender Render. You want to click that and make sure you set it to Cycles Render. This is the rendering engine for Blender. That means when you go to process your image, for the final image, it's going to use a different set of rules, different math, and a different way of getting the final picture. Cycles Render currently is the better render engine, and most of the tutorials that you're going to see on YouTube for Blender is going to be in Cycles Render. If you're not sure and you're watching a new tutorial, make sure that you look at this top box to see what render engine they're using. And I'm going to show you the options in Blender can change depending on the render engine that you use. So if I go to my Materials tab in Cycles Render, you will see that it comes up and says Use Nodes. And it'll come up looking like this. However, if I switch now to Blender Render, it changes. Materials are completely different in Cycles Render than they are in Blender Render. You will get more realistic looking results in Cycles Render. So be sure that you click over to Cycles Render. Now we'll look at some of the options up here. The first one is our file option. You will use this a lot. You can create a new project, you can open a current project or a recent project. You can recover your last session, which sometimes is helpful if Blender crashes on you. Sometimes you can recover it. You can save your file, save as, save a copy, user preferences, which we will get into here in a bit. You can save your startup file, so let me explain that one before I go too far. So if you opened up Blender and it was on Blender Render and you changed it to Cycles Render, every time you reopen Blender you will have to then go back in and change it to Cycles Render. If you don't like doing that, you can change it to Cycles Render, click File, and save Startup File. And every time you open Blender, it will be on Cycles Render. Now you can do this with all sorts of options. Like, if I go to my Scene tab, it will give you units, where it lets me measure things in metric, imperial, or Blender units, or none. I like to use metric units, which is weird because I'm in America. But yeah, I like to use metric units. So I click on metric units and then I click Save Startup File. So then every time I open Blender, it will automatically have metric units clicked, saved. So I don't have to click it every time I open Blender. This is very, very useful. Your next options are going to be Load Factory Settings. If you mess something up, or if you click an option, you don't know what it did, but you can't figure something out, you can load your factory settings. It'll return everything to its default form. Link, append, previews, import and export. These are all advanced options that I will not be covering in this tutorial. Your next tab here is going to be the Render tab. This is very important because this is how you render out your final image. So if I click on Render Image right now, you'll see it does some math, and boom, there's our rendered image. So this is what your final picture is going to look like. This is how you finish a project every time. There's also options in here for render animation, which will render a lot of different frames at a time. You can do GL animations and images, which is basically the same thing that you look at when you're looking at this screen. It's pretty much the same thing. Then there's the Show Hide Render View. That's what I just clicked. That will show the render, and then you can hide the render so that all you're seeing is the regular screen. And you can play the rendered animation if you have an animation saved. Our next tab is Window. I do not personally use this tab. However, you are free to play around with it if you would like. It basically is just going to move your windows around, if that's something that you want to do. Next is your Help tab. This is going to give you a lot of resources that Blender has for how to use Blender, or tutorials, or if you have a question about a function. This is where you can go to get that help. Or you can obviously just go to Google, like I do, and click it and look it up. Okay, so that's pretty much the entirety of the top tab for now. We will come back to this box later. Next, we need to look at our main window. This entire bit here, if you can see me trying to circle it with my mouse, this whole window here is called your 3D view. This is your main space for working on a project. This is where you can see your object, you can see your lights, you can see your camera, you can add new objects, manipulate the objects, whatever it is that you need to do. That is what this window is going to do. And it gives you an options bar over here that probably looks really scary right now if you're just first starting out in Blender. But that's okay, because we will help explain some of this stuff to you. There's also a toolbar over here. This is where the majority of your modeling is going to happen. So this will change depending on the situation that you are in your main window. So if I tab into edit mode, you will see that my options have changed to give me more options to manipulate my object. And if I tab out, they change back. There are also mini tabs over here. If you click Create, you can create a brand new object. So if I click on UV Sphere, you can see that I have created a sphere in the middle of my workspace. You can go to Relations and create groups, linked objects. You can go to Animation tab. This is probably going to take you a long time to get to. You can go to the Physics tab, or you can use the Grease Pencil tab, which is something we will get to shortly. Now this tab, this whole window here, this toolbar, you can manipulate this in a lot of different ways. If you use your mouse over the corner, over the side of it, you'll see that you get two little arrows. And if you click and drag, you can make this window longer or shorter if you need to be able to see it better. It's also split into two windows here. This is going to show this object if there's any special options that come up, and you can raise that or lower it. So you can make the window look pretty much any way that you want it to. Now if you hit the T key on your keyboard, that hides the toolbar completely. If you don't have the toolbar over there, like I did, hit the T key and it will pop open for you. There's one more hidden window that usually doesn't show up, but there's a little plus sign over here in the corner. Now if you click the plus sign, it opens that window for you. This is your options menu. This is what's going to help you. It helps you do a lot of things. We will get further into this later. But you can also use the M key to close and open that window. So let's go down here to the next menu. This right here is how you change the type of window that you're in. If I click it, you'll see this is the 3D view. We can switch that to any of these other windows, but we'll go into that a little bit further later as well. There's the View tab. This is going to show a lot of different options for viewing the object in your 3D view. There's the Select tab. This is going to give you options to select different things on your screen. The Add tab. This is going to allow you to add new objects to your scene. And your Object tab. This is going to give you some more options for the object already selected on your screen. Next is the drop box for what mode you want your object to be in. Currently, we should be in Object mode. There is an Edit mode, Sculpt mode, Vertex paint, Weight paint, and Texture paint. You will use every single one of these options in a project. The most used options are going to be Object mode and Edit mode. You can switch back and forth between these two modes by hitting the Tab key, like this. Your next option here is going to be how you actually see your object. You can change to Wireframe mode so that you just see the outline of the object, Solid mode, which should be the default mode, Texture mode so you can see if you have any textures applied to it, which we don't right now, Material tab, which will give you the materials applied. Blender automatically gives it a white material if you're using the Cycles render engine. And then there is Rendered mode. This will show you in real time what your object is going to look like. The rest of these options are things that don't exactly need explaining at the moment, so we're going to skip those. The next window down here that you can see is called your timeline. Some versions of Blender don't automatically pop this up at the bottom of your screen, but this one does. And we don't really need this right now because this is used for animation. You see, it shows the frames that you're using in animation and will allow you to skip back and forth between certain frames. Frame 30, 40, all the way up to 250. Now if my object was manipulated and I set key points for each of those frames, you would see my object move as I scrub through my timeline. But we haven't done that. And we don't need this toolbar for this tutorial. Now you can change this toolbar right down here in the bottom. If you would like to, you could change it to anything that you want if you find something more useful. However, for this tutorial, we're not going to do that. Since we don't need this toolbar, we're going to get rid of it. And you can do this with any window that you want. So if I go to the top of this window right here, you'll see it turns into two arrows, where I can drag it bigger or make it smaller. But I can also right-click on it and call Join Area. This brings up an arrow that shows me which direction I'm going to join the screen. So if the arrow is pointing up and this area is darkened, my timeline will be the only thing remaining. But if my arrow is pointing down and my 3D view is highlighted, then my 3D view will be the only thing left. So make sure your arrow is pointing down and left click. And you can see now that that whole window is gone, which gives us a larger area to view things with. You can do this with any window that you would like. Now there are other ways that you can manipulate your windows if you need a better workspace. That's what this tab up here can do for you. Right now it is set on default, but we can go to our 3D view full and it will give us just a blank screen with our 3D view. This is good if you need a full screen to see an entire scene. You can also go to an animation window, which gives you all the tools that you would need to animate. You can go to the compositing tab, and I use this option a lot because this gives you direct access to all of your materials and how you set up your textures to all of your objects. So if I click on my node editor down here, This is the screen that I use a lot. And you will probably too when you get to learn Blender a little bit more. So let's go back to our default view. There's also game logic, motion tracking, scripting, UV editing, and there's even a video editor included in Blender. If you like any of those screens better than this screen, you can use them. Blender is designed to be almost anything that you want it to be. So if you find one way works better for you, don't be afraid to change it. Now there's one more way that you can customize Blender, and that's in our file, User Preferences. If we go into here and we click on Interface, there are a lot of options. And I can honestly say that I don't know what a lot of these things mean. However, I have changed a few of them personally myself to make Blender easier to use. I have a global pivot point, which allows me to click on an object and pivot around that object so that I don't have to adjust my zoom in and zoom out. It's a lot of things to take in, but just don't forget that it's here. If you find something that's just not as easy to use as you would like it, a lot of those options are in this screen. There are also themes that you can use where you can download new themes, or you can just play with the colors of Blender. More than likely, the background of Blender, you can see my background is a light gray color. I use light gray because it is easier for me to see on a big screen. You guys probably have this darker gray color, something like the background of this window. But you can change these colors to anything you would like. If you want to make it crazy and make it blue or pink, you can do that. Just remember, when you change colors, sometimes it can affect the visibility of some of the options that you have in Blender. You can also go to the input section, and this is going to allow you to set all of your shortcuts on your keyboard and mouse. This is really helpful, and it will also teach you a lot of the shortcuts if you don't know what they are already. When you're done changing all of your settings, make sure that you click Save User Settings. I'm not going to do that because I haven't changed anything. So here we are in Blender. Now Blender, when you open a new project, will automatically start you out with a cube, a lamp, and a camera. To move your way around this 3D space, you must hold the middle mouse button in. This is your scroll wheel usually. You hold it in and then drag your mouse around, and it will allow you to move freely about your 3D space. If you would like to actually move your 3D space, you can hold Shift and hold the same mouse button down, and it will pan across your scene. Now scrolling in and out on your wheel will zoom you closer and further away. There are a lot more options and a lot more keyboard shortcuts that you can use to make this easier. Your numpad on the side of your keyboard, hopefully you have a numpad, will allow you to set your view to very specific angles. Pressing 1 on the numpad will bring you to the front view. 7 brings you to the top view, whereas 8, 6, 2, and 4 do very small increments in different directions. There is a key, numpad 5, that will change you to something called orthographic view. Right now, in the top left corner, you can almost barely see it because it's written in white. It's called user perspective. That means that we're in perspective mode. If we click 5 on our numpad, it changes us to user orthographic view. Now if I click my 1 on my numpad, it changes me to my front view and gives me a very flat view. This is very, very useful when working in the 3D space, because it can be hard sometimes to work in it like this, to get things symmetrical. So remember that 5 will change you to a much better view if you need to work in a much 2D space. If you hit the 0 key on your numpad, it will take you into your camera view. This will show you what your final scene is going to look like through your camera. Now Blender is a little bit different than normal programs. In order to interact with most of the things on this screen, you're going to be right-clicking instead of left-clicking. If I left-click, this object right here in the center of my screen is called my 3D cursor. Wherever my 3D cursor is placed, that's where new objects will be added to the scene. It has a lot of other functions too, but if you left-click anywhere in Blender, it moves that 3D cursor. If you want to reset your 3D cursor back to the middle, hit your N key to open up this menu. Now if you look down, there's an option that says 3D cursor, and it gives a location. That's its location in the 3D space. You can click on one of these and hit 0. Tab to the next box and hit 0. Tab to the next box and hit 0 again. And then I'm going to hit enter. And you can see that it has removed my 3D cursor back to the middle of the screen. In order to select the cube, instead of left-clicking, I must right-click. This can take some getting used to. However, it seems to be the way most people like to do it in Blender, and it doesn't seem like they're going to change it anytime soon. So the faster you get used to right-clicking, the better. You can see that there's an orange outline, very faint orange outline around the cube. That means that my cube is selected. If I hit my tab key, I will go into edit mode. And everything will be in orange because I have everything selected. This is how you change an object. If I hit my A key, that is the deselect or select all key. So I'm going to deselect all. At the corner of this object, you will see little black dots. These are called vertices. This is what's going to help you to manipulate your object. Now remember, you need to right-click on those vertices, not left-click. And now you can see that I have only this vertice selected, not this one. There are multiple options that you can use, especially over here in your toolbox. I don't want to hammer too many shortcut keys into you at once. However, it's very, very useful to learn as many shortcuts as possible because it will make blending very, very easy. So let's look at our transform box. We have translate, rotate, scale, shrink, fatten, push, pull. All of these options will give you different results when manipulating your cube. If we scale that vertice, it does nothing because we only have one vertice selected. There's nothing to scale. If I translate it, it allows me to basically just grab it and move it around. Now you can see that I have deformed my cube. If I hit Ctrl Z, just like in most other programs, it allows me to undo my last option. So let me translate that one more time. I'm going to translate it. Left-clicking keeps it there. But if I translate it, I get it to here and realize that that's not the function that I wanted to use, I can right-click and it cancels the movement. It's a little It's a little hard to get that into your memory at first because when you use these options, most of the time you're going to be right-clicking to select things, but this one you're right-clicking to cancel an option. This can be a little confusing at first, but just play around with it a little bit and you'll get used to it very quickly. So now let's try to rotate it. Again, we only have one vertice selected, so it's not going to do anything. Most of these options are not going to do anything without multiple vertices selected. So let's select two vertices. I'm going to hold my Shift key and right-click on another vertice. That allows me to select multiple vertices at a time. So now if I click Translate, you will see that they both move. And I can right-click to cancel that movement. Now if I click Rotate, you will see that they begin to rotate. If I hit Scale, they will get smaller and bigger. Shrink and Fatten, and Push and Pull. This is how you manipulate your object. Now all of these options have shortcut keys. So, once you get good at shortcut keys, you'll be able to do this a lot faster. Something like this. I manipulated that cube a lot just using shortcut keys. If you had to move back over here and select the correct box of what you wanted to do, it would take you a long time. So make sure that you memorize those shortcut keys. Now I'm going to Control Z until I get back to my normal cube. Now if at any time I want to select everything, I hit my A key, and I can apply these same principles to the entire object. I can translate it and move the whole object. I can rotate the object. I can scale the object. Shrink and fatten the object, which is pretty much the same as scale when you have the whole thing selected. And push and pull, which again is pretty much scale when you have the whole object selected. However, if I hit my Tab key and exit edit mode, I am now back in object mode. I can do a lot of these same things from here. I can scale it, I can rotate it, and I can translate it. This is usually useful because you don't want to mess up the vertices in your object. If you want the whole object to be big but don't want to have to mess with the vertices at all, you can just pop out into object mode and do it from here. So now if I don't want the cube, and most of the time I will say that tutorials that you will watch will probably not want you to use the cube. So to delete the cube, make sure it is selected and hit your X key. It will ask you if you want to delete it. And we have deleted our cube. But now there's nothing left in our scene to manipulate. So how do we add a new object? There is the Create tab. You can add objects from here. Or you can hold Shift A and add objects from here. Whichever is easier for you. I'm going to add a circle. This is not a 3D object. You can see that it is just a line on the ground. However, if I hit my 1 on my numpad and go to my front view, I'm going to zoom in and click Tab to go into edit mode. If I rotate my view back, you can see it has vertices just like our cube, but it has a lot more. Now I can use these vertices in any way that I would like. I'm going to use them to make a different object. So if I click 1 on my numpad, I hit A to select everything. I'm now going to hit the E key. This allows me to extrude my vertices. It's not quite the same as duplicating them, but you'll get the hang of which is which. So let's hit E. When I move my mouse, you can see that there's a new set of vertices, and it's starting to look like an object. Now I can put these anywhere that I want. Let's say I put them here. That's what my object is going to look like. Now you have a couple of options when manipulating an object in Blender. Since you're working in a 3D space, there are axes that you can use to better guide you when you make an object. You can see very faintly on the grid floor that there is a green and a red line. These green and red lines are guides to what your axes are, and if you look in the bottom corner of your screen, you can see exactly what those lines mean. Green is your y-axis, X is your red axis, and Z is your blue axis. Now I have my Z-axis hidden, and I have a few other things that might be a little bit different than yours, because I just don't like them cluttering up my screen. But these axes will allow you to easily manipulate your object just by hitting that key. So let me go to my front view again by pressing 1 on my numpad. I'm going to hit Ctrl Z to undo my extrude. And there is a blue line here showing me my Z-axis is going up and down. So if I want to move my object straight up and down, I'm going to hit the E key to extrude, and you can see it still moves freely. But now I hit my Z key and it will snap to the Z-axis. Now it will only move straight up and down the Z-axis. You can also hit X to move on the X-axis, or Y to move on the Y-axis. So let me grab that and move it up to here on the Z-axis. Now I can also scale that by hitting the S key, like this. Extrude it again by hitting the E key, and make sure it's on the Z-axis by hitting the Z key. And then I will extrude it again on the Z-axis, hitting the E and the Z key, and we will scale it again by hitting the S key. Let's extrude it one more time on the Z-axis. Right about there looks good. So now we have an object. It doesn't really look like anything, right? But it could have been anything. It could have been a vase, a cup, a tree. You could turn these vertices into anything. And we really didn't learn a whole lot about Blender to do it. So let me show you very quickly a couple of things that you might be able to create. I'm going to hit my Ctrl Z and undo my actions. And let's go. So I'm just basically using the E key to extrude, and my S key to scale. And it's not taking me very long to make a pretty decent looking object, right? This is how easy it is to work in Blender. I highly suggest doing this on a regular basis when you first start out. just playing around in Blender, figuring out some of the settings, figuring out all of its intricate designs, all of the things that you can do with it. It will help you in following tutorials, but it will also help you to start your own projects. And just like that, we have the basis for a vase. Now you can see that this object looks very dark. This is something to do with something called normals. I'm not going to get into normals too much in this tutorial because it's a little confusing, but I can fix it by clicking on Flip Normals. Yours may not look like that, it may be nice and shiny, but since mine was not, I just want it to look nice for you guys. Another thing that you will notice is that it looks very blocky. You can see all of the geometry in our object. Maybe we don't want all of the geometry to be in our object. Maybe we want it to be smooth. There is an option for this. In our left toolbox, under the Tools tab, we are in Object Mode. And there's an option here called Shading, with Flat and Smooth as an option. If I click Smooth, you can see that the geometry is now gone, and it looks very smooth. If you don't like it, you can always click Flat, and it will change it back. And that's the basics of making an object in Blender. So now that you know a little bit of what you're doing, I would suggest going to Google and looking for Blender hotkeys and studying the Blender hotkeys before getting too involved in Blender. It's an absolute must to know the hotkeys, or else you're never going to be able to blend quickly, and Blender is probably going to seem frustrating. Now that we have an object in Blender, we can hit our 0 on the numpad, and it shows you what's going to be seen in our final render. Now our full object is not seen here, so I'm going to hit 1 on my numpad, and right-click on the camera so that you can move the camera, clicking 7 to go to my top view, and I'm just going to move it back. Now if I look through, it's getting closer. I need to rotate it, so I'm clicking R to rotate, and it's on its side. So let's try and rotate it this way. I'm grabbing it with the G key, rotate it just a little bit more, and right about there. So now if I click on Render and Render Image, this is what our final product is going to look like. Now obviously we could make this a lot more detailed. There are a lot of other options that we never get to. Let me show you a couple. Like, if I want this object to be smoother and have more geometry, I can add a subdivision surface modifier, and it smooths it out. Or, if I want to give it a material, I can add a new material and change the basic color that will render. There are a lot of different options in here. However, it's better to get to the modeling first before you get into materials, because Cycles Render materials can be a bit confusing. So let's look at our final render one more time. You can see that I've changed the color now to blue, and that it looks generally a lot smoother than it did before, just adding a few options. So hopefully you guys learned a lot about Blender, If you have any questions, I try to help everybody that comments on my video. And if there's anything that you really like to learn or really like to see me explain in Blender, do not be afraid to comment and let me know. I have plenty of other tutorials, though not all of them are beginner friendly. Be sure to check out the rest of my channel. Thank you guys for watching.